Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Life, as we all know, is not without its storms. Hardships come to each of us, uninvited and often unexpected. They shake our foundations, test our strength, and challenge our faith. But today I want to remind you of a profound truth. When hardships come, rest in God's everlasting care. Hardships are not evidence that God has abandoned us. They are opportunities for His presence to shine even brighter in our lives. You see, God is sovereign. He knows every detail of our struggles. Nothing catches Him off guard. He knew the storm before it formed, and He already designed the way through it. Hardships are an inevitable part of life. No one is exempt from challenges, no matter how strong, successful, or faithful they may appear. Life brings seasons of joy, but it also brings seasons of difficulty, where the path seems uncertain, the load feels unbearable, and the future looks dim. These moments often come unannounced, shaking the very foundation of our faith and leaving us searching for answers. Yet, it is in these seasons of hardship that we are shaped, refined, and strengthened in ways we may not immediately understand. To acknowledge hardships is not to glorify them, but to recognize their role in our lives. Too often we perceive challenges as obstacles, designed to hinder us, yet they carry a divine purpose that stretches far beyond our human comprehension. Every difficulty we face has the potential to teach us something invaluable about ourselves, others, and most importantly, God. Hardships do not exist in a vacuum. They're often divine tools that reveal the strength of our character and the depth of our faith. Consider this truth. Life was never promised to be free of trials. In fact, Jesus Himself assured us, in this world you will have trouble. Those words might seem disheartening at first glance, but they are followed by a life-giving promise. But take heart, I have overcome the world. John 16:33. This verse serves as a reminder that while hardships are guaranteed, so is the victory that God has prepared for us through Him. The trials we encounter are not random or meaningless. They are opportunities for God to reveal His power and His faithfulness. Hardships often force us to confront the illusion of control. We like to believe that we have everything figured out, that our plans will unfold exactly as we envision. But when difficulties arise, they disrupt that sense of control, leaving us vulnerable and exposed. It is in these moments of vulnerability that we come face to face with our human limitations. As uncomfortable as it may be, this realization is a gift. It reminds us that we were never meant to navigate life alone, relying solely on our strength and wisdom. Instead, hardships draw us closer to God, the one who holds all things together. There is something profoundly humbling about adversity. It strips away the superficial layers of our lives and exposes what truly matters. The things we often prioritize, wealth, status, achievements, suddenly lose their significance when we are confronted with real challenges. Hardships force us to reevaluate our priorities and shift our focus from temporary pursuits to eternal truths. They remind us that our identity is not rooted in what we do or what we have, but in who we are as children of God. At times, the pain of hardships can feel unbearable. It is natural to question why we must endure such suffering. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why does life seem so unfair? These questions are as old as humanity itself. And while we may never fully understand the reasons behind every trial, we can take comfort in knowing that God sees the bigger picture. What may seem like a setback or a punishment to us is often a setup for something greater. God's perspective is eternal, and His plans are far higher than ours. Hardships also serve as a test of our faith. When everything is going well, it is easy to proclaim our trust in God. But true faith is revealed in the midst of the storm, when the outcome is uncertain and the future seems bleak. It is during these times that we must choose to stand firm, believing that God is still in control, even when circumstances suggest otherwise. Faith is not the absence of doubt or fear. It is the decision to trust God despite them. One of the most powerful aspects of hardship is its ability to foster empathy and compassion. When we experience pain, we gain a deeper understanding of the struggles others face. Our hearts are softened, and we become more inclined to offer grace and kindness to those who are hurting. In this way, our own suffering can become a source of healing and encouragement for others. It reminds us that we are all connected, that no one is immune to the challenges of life, and that we are called to support one another through them. Hardships are not meant to define us, but they do refine us. Like gold tested in the fire, our character is purified through the trials we endure. Each challenge we face is an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to become more like the person God created us to be. While the process may be painful, the result is worth it. God does not waste our pain. He uses it for His glory and our good. So, as we acknowledge the reality of hardships, let us not be discouraged. Instead, let us embrace them as a necessary part of the journey. Let us trust that even in our darkest moments, God is working all things together for our good. And let us hold on to the hope that the trials of today are preparing us for the blessings of tomorrow. God's sovereignty is one of the most profound truths we can cling to, especially in times of hardship. To say that God is sovereign is to declare that He is in absolute control over everything. He is not limited by time, space, or circumstance. His power is unmatched, His wisdom is infinite, and His authority is final. This understanding provides a foundation of comfort and confidence, knowing that nothing in our lives happens by accident or outside His divine will. When we talk about God's sovereignty, we are acknowledging that He is the creator of all things and the sustainer of life itself. The heavens declare His glory, and the earth proclaims His handiwork. Everything that exists does so because He willed it into being. This means that no detail escapes His notice, no event surprises Him, and no situation is beyond His control. From the smallest molecule to the vast expanse of the universe, God reigns supreme. This truth is both awe-inspiring and deeply reassuring. In a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable, the sovereignty of God reminds us that there is a divine order behind it all. Even when life seems to spiral out of control, God remains steady, unshaken by the turmoil we face. He is not merely watching from a distance. He is actively involved in the details of our lives, orchestrating events according to His perfect plan. One of the most challenging aspects of understanding God's sovereignty is reconciling it with the existence of pain and suffering. If God is in control, why do bad things happen? Why does He allow trials to enter our lives? These are questions that many have wrestled with, and while we may never fully grasp the answers, we can trust that God's ways are higher than our ways. His sovereignty does not mean that He causes evil, but it does mean that He can use even the darkest circumstances for His glory and our ultimate good. Take, for example, the story of Joseph in the Bible. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned, Joseph's life was marked by a series of hardships that seemed unfair and unjust. Yet, through it all, God was at work, positioning Joseph to become a leader in Egypt and ultimately save his family and countless others from famine. When Joseph looked back on his journey, he could say with confidence, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." Genesis 50 to 20. This statement reflects a profound understanding of God's sovereignty, an acknowledgement that even in the midst of suffering, God's plan prevailed. God's sovereignty also assures us that His timing is perfect. We often grow impatient, wanting answers and solutions immediately, but God operates on a timeline far beyond our comprehension. What may feel like a delay to us is in fact His deliberate preparation. He sees the end from the beginning, weaving together a tapestry that we can only glimpse in fragments. His timing is not meant to frustrate us, but to teach us trust and dependence on Him. Another aspect of God's sovereignty is His ability to redeem and restore. No matter how broken a situation may seem, God has the power to bring beauty from ashes. He specializes in turning mourning into dancing, despair into hope, and failure into victory. When we surrender our lives to Him, He takes the pieces of our shattered dreams and reshapes them into something far greater than we could have imagined. This is the power of a sovereign God, one who does not waste our pain, but uses it to accomplish His purposes. God's sovereignty is not just a theological concept, it is deeply personal. It means that He knows you by name, understands every detail of your life, and has a unique plan for your journey. Psalm 139 beautifully captures this truth. You saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. Psalm 139:16 NLT. This verse reminds us that our lives are not random. They are part of a divine story, authored by a sovereign God. When we embrace the sovereignty of God, we can rest in the assurance that nothing we face is beyond His control. The storms of life may rage, but He is the one who calms the seas. The mountains may seem insurmountable, but He is the one who moves them. Even when we don't understand His ways, we can trust His heart, knowing that He is good, faithful, and unchanging. In moments of uncertainty and doubt, the sovereignty of God becomes our anchor. It steadies us when the waves threaten to overwhelm us and gives us hope when all seems lost. We can stand firm, knowing that the God who created the universe is the same God who holds our lives in His hands. His plans for us are good, His purposes are eternal, and His sovereignty is our refuge. No matter what we face, we can trust that He is in control and that His love for us never fails. Faith over fear is a principle that challenges us to choose trust in God's promises over the anxieties and uncertainties that often confront us in life. Fear is a natural human response to the unknown, to loss, or to situations that seem beyond our control. It can creep in quietly or come rushing like a storm, paralyzing us and clouding our vision. Yet faith offers an alternative, a way to rise above fear and live with confidence, even in the face of adversity. Fear has a way of magnifying problems and diminishing our perception of God's power. It whispers lies to our hearts, telling us that we are alone, that the challenges we face are too great, and that there is no hope. These lies can become overwhelming if we allow them to take root. But faith confronts fear head on. Faith declares that no matter how insurmountable the situation appears, God is bigger, stronger, and always present. The Bible repeatedly calls us to choose faith over fear. One of the most powerful examples is found in the story of Peter walking on water, Matthew 14:22 through 33. When Peter saw Jesus walking on the sea, he stepped out of the boat in faith, trusting that Jesus would sustain him. For a moment, Peter experienced the miraculous, walking on the water himself. But when he shifted his focus from Jesus to the wind and waves, fear took over, and he began to sink. This story illustrates a timeless truth. Fear grows when we take our eyes off God and focus on the storm. Faith, however, keeps our gaze fixed on Him, enabling us to overcome even the most turbulent waters. Faith over fear does not mean denying the existence of challenges or pretending that fear doesn't exist. Rather, it is about acknowledging the fear, but refusing to let it control us. Faith is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to trust God in spite of it. It is standing firm on the promises of God, even when everything around us seems to suggest otherwise. This is why Scripture continually reminds us, do not fear. These words appear more than 300 times in the Bible, not as a suggestion, but as a command, rooted in the character and faithfulness of God. Choosing faith over fear begins with understanding who God is. Fear thrives on uncertainty, but faith is grounded in the certainty of God's nature. He is faithful, unchanging, and all-powerful. When we meditate on His attributes and remember His past faithfulness in our lives, our confidence in Him grows. Psalm 56, 3-4 captures this beautifully. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise. In God I trust and am not afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? Here the psalmist acknowledges fear, but combats it with trust in God's power and protection. Another vital aspect of living with faith over fear is surrender. Fear often stems from our desire to control outcomes and our realization that we cannot. Faith, on the other hand, calls us to surrender our plans, our fears, and our future to God. It reminds us that we don't need to have all the answers because God does. Proverbs 3:5-6 encourages us to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to Him, and He will make your path straight. Surrendering control is not easy, but it is liberating. It shifts the burden from our shoulders to the hands of the one who is infinitely capable. Faith also requires action. It is not passive or stagnant. To choose faith over fear is to step forward in obedience even when the path ahead is unclear. It is taking that first step, trusting that God will provide the strength and guidance needed along the way. Abraham's journey to an unknown land, Genesis 12, is a testament to this kind of faith. He didn't have all the details, but he trusted God's promise and moved forward. That same trust is available to us today. When we choose faith over fear, it not only transforms our perspective, but also impacts those around us. Fear can be contagious, but so can faith. When others see us walking in confidence, anchored in God's promises, it inspires and encourages them to do the same. This is why community and fellowship are so important in our faith journey. Together, we can remind one another of God's faithfulness and speak truth into situations where fear seeks to dominate. Ultimately, faith over fear is about trust, trusting that God's plan is greater than our understanding, that His love for us is perfect and casts out fear, 1 John 4:18, and that He will never leave us or forsake us. Fear may still knock at the door of our hearts, but we don't have to let it in. By choosing faith, we stand firm, not because of our own strength, but because of the one who stands with us. Faith over fear is not a one-time decision. It is a daily choice. It is a continual process of surrendering our worries and placing our trust in the hands of a faithful God. And as we do so, we discover that His peace surpasses all understanding, guarding our hearts and minds, and enabling us to live victoriously, no matter the circumstances. Resting in God is one of the most profound gifts we are invited to embrace in our spiritual journey. It is not merely physical rest or inactivity. It is a deep soul-level trust in God's sovereignty, His goodness, and His timing. Resting in God is about finding peace in His presence, surrendering our anxieties, and experiencing a calm assurance that comes from knowing He is in control, even when life feels chaotic and uncertain. Life often pushes us to strive endlessly, both physically and emotionally. We live in a world that glorifies busyness, where worth is often tied to productivity and rest can feel like a luxury or even a weakness. Yet God calls us to a different rhythm. He calls us to rest, not just as an act of obedience, but as an act of faith. Resting in God acknowledges that while our efforts have limits, His power does not. It is a reminder that we are not meant to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. Responsibility belongs to Him. Resting in God is rooted in trust. It requires us to believe that God is who He says He is and that He will do what He has promised. When we choose to rest in Him, we are declaring, God, I trust you with what I cannot control. I trust you with my future, my family, my struggles, and my dreams. This level of trust doesn't come naturally to us. We are often tempted to rely on our own strength, to solve problems in our own way, and to exhaust ourselves in the process. But God invites us to lay down our burdens and come to Him, just as Jesus said in Matthew 11:28-30. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. The rest Jesus speaks of is not just physical relief, it is spiritual renewal. It is the kind of rest that quiets our racing thoughts, calms our anxious hearts, and restores our weary souls. It is a rest that comes from being in His presence and trusting in His provision. This is the rest that sustains us through the storms of life and gives us peace that surpasses all understanding. Philippians 4:7. Resting in God also means surrendering our timing and expectations to Him. So often we grow restless because we are waiting for answers, for breakthroughs, or for clarity. In those seasons of waiting, we can feel tempted to take matters into our own hands, to force outcomes, or to grow bitter when things don't unfold as we hoped. But God calls us to be still and trust in His perfect timing. Psalm 37:7 reminds us to be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. This stillness is not passive. It is an active trust that God is working behind the scenes even when we cannot see it. There is power in resting in God because it positions us to receive His grace. When we stop striving and start resting, we make room for God to move in ways we could never accomplish on our own. Resting in Him is not giving up, it is giving over, surrendering our limited abilities and inviting His unlimited power to work in and through us. Isaiah 40:31 beautifully illustrates this truth. But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Rest in God renews us, giving us the strength to keep moving forward. Another aspect of resting in God is abiding in His presence. In John 15:04, Jesus says, "Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me." To abide means to remain, to dwell, to rest in His presence continually. When we live in close communion with God, we find the strength, peace, and wisdom we need for each day. As resting in Him is not a one-time act, it is a lifestyle of dependence on His presence and guidance. Resting in God also protects us from burnout. When we try to carry the weight of life on our own, we eventually reach a breaking point. But when we rest in God, we acknowledge that we were never meant to bear it alone. God invites us to cast our cares on Him because He cares for us. 1 Peter 5:7. Ultimately, the power of resting in God lies in the peace it brings. It is the peace of knowing that He is for us, not against us. It is the peace of trusting that His plans for us are good, even when they don't align with our own. It is the peace of resting in His everlasting love. which never fails and never falters. In a world that constantly demands more from us, resting in God is a radical act of faith. It is choosing to step back, to let go, and to trust that He is more than enough. It is in this rest that we find not only strength, but also the fullness of joy and the assurance that His grace is sufficient for every need. End quote. God's everlasting care is one of the most comforting and transformative truths we can hold on to. In a world filled with uncertainty, pain, and shifting circumstances, God's care provides a refuge that is unshakable and eternal. To find refuge in God's care is to experience His protection, provision, and presence, even in the most challenging seasons of life. It is to rest in the assurance that He is always near, always attentive, and always faithful. The concept of God as a refuge is a recurring theme throughout Scripture. Psalm 46:1 declares, "God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble." These words remind us that God is not distant or detached from our struggles. Instead, He is our safe place, our hiding place, and the one we can run to when the storms of life threaten to overwhelm us. His care is not fleeting or conditional. It is everlasting, extending from generation to generation and rooted in His unchanging character. When we think of refuge, we often envision a shelter from danger or harm, a place where we can feel secure. God's care offers us that and so much more. It is not just a physical protection, but an emotional and spiritual sanctuary. In times of fear, worry, or despair, His care surrounds us, giving us peace that transcends understanding. Isaiah 26:3 promises, "You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in You." This peace comes from knowing that no matter what we face, we are held in the hands of a loving and sovereign God. One of the most powerful aspects of God's care as a refuge is His attentiveness. In a world where we can often feel unseen or unheard, God reminds us that He sees every tear, hears every prayer, and knows every detail of our lives. Matthew 10:29-31 illustrates this beautifully. "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows." These verses reveal the depth of God's care for His creation, and most importantly, for us. His refuge is not impersonal or generic. It is deeply personal and tailored to our individual needs. God's everlasting care as a refuge also extends to His provision. He meets us in our moments of lack and supplies all that we need, whether it be strength, wisdom, or resources. Philippians 4:19 assures us, "And my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of His glory in Christ Jesus." This provision is not always in the form we expect, but it is always exactly what we need. God's care sustains us in ways we may not immediately recognize, and His timing is always perfect. Finding refuge in God's care also requires trust. It is not always easy to relinquish control and place our burdens in His hands, but it is necessary if we are to experience the fullness of His care. Proverbs 3:5-6 reminds us, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, and in all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight." Trusting God means believing that His care is sufficient, even when we cannot see the way forward. It means resting in the knowledge that He is working all things together for our good. Romans 8:28. In seasons of hardship, God's care becomes even more evident. When we are at our weakest, He is our strength. When we feel abandoned, He is our comforter. When we face uncertainty, He is our guide. Psalm 91:1-2 beautifully captures this truth. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. These words remind us that God's care is not only a refuge, but a fortress, a stronghold that cannot be penetrated by the trials of this world. God's care is everlasting, which means it is not confined by time or circumstances. It is as constant as the rising sun and as dependable as His promises. This everlasting nature of His care gives us hope, even in the face of life's uncertainties. It reminds us that the same God who cared for His people in the past is the same God who cares for us today and will continue to care for us in the future. Perhaps one of the most comforting aspects of God's care as a refuge is His invitation to draw near. He does not force us into His shelter. He lovingly invites us. In Matthew 11:28-30, Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." This invitation is open to all who are willing to place their trust in Him. Ultimately, God's care as a refuge reminds us that we are never alone. No matter how difficult life may become, we can find solace in His unchanging love and faithfulness. His care shields us, sustains us, and surrounds us with His peace. In Him we find rest, strength, and hope. The storms of life may come, but in the refuge of God's everlasting care, we are secure, held, and deeply loved. Victory through trust is a profound truth that resonates deeply in the journey of faith. It teaches us that true triumph is not achieved by our strength, intellect, or resources, but by placing our complete confidence in God. Trusting in God means surrendering control and allowing His wisdom, power, and timing to guide us through life's challenges. It is in this surrender that we discover the path to victory, not as the world defines it, but as God intends it. A life anchored in peace, joy, and purpose. Trusting God is not always easy, especially when circumstances seem overwhelming or when His plans differ from our expectations. Yet, the essence of trust lies in believing that God is who He says He is and that He will do what He has promised. Proverbs 3:5-6 captures this beautifully. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight. This kind of trust requires humility, as it calls us to acknowledge that our understanding is limited, while God's wisdom is infinite. One of the most striking examples of victory through trust is found in the story of David and Goliath. 1 Samuel 17, David, a young shepherd boy, faced a giant warrior armed with nothing but a sling, a few stones, and unwavering trust in God. From a worldly perspective, David stood no chance. Yet, his faith in God's power allowed him to overcome insurmountable odds. David's victory was not rooted in his abilities, but in his confidence that the battle belonged to the Lord. This story reminds us that when we trust God, He can use even the smallest resources to bring about extraordinary outcomes. Trusting God often requires stepping out in faith, even when the outcome is uncertain. Abraham's journey to the promised land is a testament to this. When God called Abraham to leave his homeland and go to a place He would show him, Abraham obeyed without knowing where the journey would lead. His trust in God's promise allowed him to walk into the unknown with confidence. God has a plan. How successful can the people who engage Him? In the same way, our willingness to trust God in uncertainty positions us to experience His provision, guidance, and ultimately, victory. Victory through trust is not about avoiding challenges, but about overcoming them through God's strength. Life will undoubtedly bring trials, disappointments, and obstacles. However, trusting God gives us the assurance that we do not face these difficulties alone. Isaiah 41:10 provides a powerful promise. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. This verse reminds us that God's presence and power are with us every step of the way, enabling us to stand firm even in the fiercest storms. Trusting God also requires patience, as His timing often differs from ours. In a culture that values instant results, waiting on God can feel frustrating. Yet God's delays are not denials. They are opportunities for growth and preparation. Consider the story of Joseph, who endured betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment before rising to a position of influence in Egypt. Genesis 37:14. Throughout his journey, Joseph trusted that God had a purpose for his pain. In the end, Joseph's trust was rewarded as God used his circumstances to save many lives. Joseph's story encourages us to trust God's plan even when it doesn't make sense in the moment. Victory through trust also brings freedom. When we trust God, we release the burdens of worry, fear, and striving. Jesus invites us to this freedom in Matthew 11:28-30. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Trusting in God's care allows us to rest, knowing that He is working on our behalf. Trusting God is not a passive act. It is active and intentional. It involves prayer, studying His Word, and aligning our thoughts and actions with His will. Psalm 37:5-6 encourages us, commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. As we commit our plans and desires to God, He aligns our steps with His purpose, leading us to victory. Ultimately, victory through trust is about shifting our perspective. It is recognizing that God's definition of victory may not always align with our expectations. While we often associate victory with success, recognition, or favorable outcomes, God's victory is about transformation, faithfulness, and bringing glory to His name. It is about becoming who He has called us to be and fulfilling the purpose He has set before us. In every season of life, whether in triumph or trial, God invites us to trust Him completely. Trust is the key that unlocks His peace, power, and provision. When we place our trust in Him, we find that He is faithful to lead us, sustain us, and bring us through to victory. Trusting God does not mean life will be without challenges, but it assures us that we will never face them alone. And in His strength, we can overcome, knowing that the ultimate victory has already been won through Him.